Hi, I'm Dr. Gwyn Erwin, and welcome back to my channel, Healing for Your Life. As you've discovered, I hope, in visiting my channel, there are 4 different playlists, and with a number of videos on each, developing as time goes by. On the developmental roadmap, which is one of the playlists, I've presented a series of 9 videos that one has an introduction and then 7 episodes on healthy development, followed by a summarizing or an integrating of those 7 keystones of my model of healthy development. Now there's a second of the 4 playlists, there's a second one that relates to it, especially starting today, which is on resolving trauma. And as a psychoanalyst, I have 2 areas of expertise. In addition to being a contemporary psychoanalyst, I also have expertise in development and in working with trauma. So beginning with this video, you're going to see the relationship between the 2. And I could actually post these videos on either playlist because they relate to both. They relate to development and they relate to trauma, but they're going to be on the developmental roadmap playlist because we're building on the first series of healthy development. So many years ago now, in the early 2000, and as I was writing my dissertation, I developed 3 original models, which I then began teaching for the training institute from where I had graduated. And these 3 models were a model of healthy development. That was a part of my original contribution to the field in my dissertation. Then there was a model of wounded development. And then there was a model on how to work with that in psychoanalytic work and in psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And I've been teaching these courses for ever since, until recently, and where I've kind of taken a sabbatical to develop some of the other areas of my life in terms of writing and my YouTube channel and the courses that I'm offering online. And so we've completed looking pretty deeply at these 7 keystones of what I call healthy development. And if you've watched any of those videos, which I hope you have before we turn to this whole new series, there are 7 aspects of development that work in an interrelated and very dynamic way. While there is a linear chronological progression to some of these keystones, they also influence each other and they build upon one another, as well as when there are gaps or failures in any one of them, that impacts how the others develop. So this new series, starting with this introduction and then followed by 7 sessions concerning each of these keystones, and then a summarizing and integrating video, is my Model 2 on the development of the wounded self. I'm not going to call it unhealthy development. I don't think that that's appropriate because this isn't a judgment. When we're talking about healthy development, we're talking about optimal development. What is needed to support the development of every child that is born throughout the first 5 years of their lives and then throughout their lifespan, because our development doesn't end at the age of 5. And that's kind of an obvious statement, I suppose, because we have adolescence, we have young adulthood, we have full adulthood, we have mature adulthood, we have the later years of life, and each of those come with their own developmental opportunities. Not just their developmental obstacles, but their opportunities as well. And one, if not the most profound opportunity that exists throughout our life is to ameliorate and mitigate the consequences of developmental gaps or failures, so that we can not only resume our development, because if we're 35, we can't pick up where we were when we were 4, but we can rebuild our development and have very creative development after that time as well. And that is the hope, the deep and profound optimistic hope that I offer you, that there are many ways to find where the gaps were, or the deficits, or the failures in one or more areas of development, and how to repair, heal, and have a new transformative experience in life with your own development or the development of your children or grandchildren, and on and on. So I'm thrilled to be offering you this new series. It will be painful sometimes because there's painful material in it. But I really trust that, just as with my patients who are having profound insights and working through changes in their very own psychology and their inner worlds and then their outer worlds, that you will find understanding and relief and a feeling of connection with me and with this material, and the hope that I am offering you in this series. So a quick review. In the first series on my model of healthy development, there are 7 keystones, beginning with states, which are states of being, and then with memory systems, and then with how we internalize our outer world, how we identify with aspects of that in the process of internalizing, how our emotional, or what we call affective, lives function, how we attach in secure attachment, how our hemispheres develop, and how our voice and language develop. So hopefully you have listened to those videos, or will now, because they provide the foundation for what we're going to explore next. And I don't want you to embark on this without that understanding. So if you haven't, I'm going to ask, I can't make you do it, but I'm going to ask that you listen to the first series first, and then come to this, because it will all start adding up. Now, another thing I want to mention before I really get into the meat of any of this is that while I have these 3 main models of healthy development, what happens when difficulties or failures occur, and when trauma occurs, and then what to do about it from now on, there is a 4th model, actually model 3, that I've tucked in there, which is the development of the traumatized self. And that could be a series in and of itself, and perhaps it should be, but I think when I turn these more into courses, I'll divide them up that way, certainly for clinicians. But in this series, I'm going to combine the 2. I'm going to compare and contrast wounded development and traumatized development. Now, the variation in the 2 is not only a matter of degree, but some of it is a matter of degree. So if we look, for instance, at our state systems, which is where this will begin and where the first series began, the states of our being in utero, at birth, and as we go along through life. When there are deficits or smaller failures or gaps in our providing environment and our providing relationships, those are going to affect our states in the sense that they're going to create more distressed states than non-distressed states. And we're going to be more driven by those states than we would like. But in traumatized development, when there is sustained trauma, whether it is event trauma or it is cumulative, and therefore daily life relational trauma, which can be even more devastating than event trauma because of its ongoing and cumulative nature, something else happens to states. Instead of them just becoming distressed or disorganized, over time they turn into character traits. So you might have a child who has had some frightening experiences, and from those frightening experiences, they've experienced a lot of fear in life, and they react fearfully to a number of triggers. But that is very different when you have a child who can be afraid or shy or timid or apprehensive or vigilant, and a child who becomes fear-based, that they are in a pretty chronic state of fear and vigilance. And so now the state experience has become a character trait of the child. They are no longer intermittently afraid, or even afraid a good deal of the time. They have a fear in them all the time to a greater or lesser degree, but it doesn't really ever turn off. It just dims or it increases. And so when we look at states, we're going to see that instead of our states of being a system of flow, that no matter what we're doing or what state we're in, we feel like ourselves, and we feel pretty coherent, and we feel pretty creative, and life is a process of learning and problem solving and relating. And not that there aren't difficulties, but they don't derail us. When you have wounded development, as I said, you're going to have more distressed states more often. And in traumatized development, those states, whatever degree they have been in a wounded sense, now become character traits. We're going to look at some of these other keystones as well. So in our second keystone of memory systems, failures in the environment and in our relationship carry great weight, because in the first 2 years of life, as you learned previously, we are implicit memory driven, which means that we are encoding life experience. We don't even have to be aware of doing so. It just happens, and then later it's retrieved from a trigger. When you have wounded development, you're going to have implicit memory intrusions. There are going to be more triggers. The child, whatever age, is going to be more apt to react and to be sensitive to potential triggers more on guard about them. But in traumatized development, that person, no matter how highly functioning they've learned how to be, because they've had to be, they are implicit memory driven. And then it's like walking in an internal minefield. They are subject at any time to internally be thrown into these implicit memory relivings. And it's an extremely precarious and challenging way to live. Now, yes, you're going to see people who are low functioning because of that, because out of their trauma, and for a variety of reasons, they've developed mental health issues, severe mental health issues. But you can have people who are very high functioning, who suffer this kind of internal minefield. And they are often high functioning because they have learned how to control their world in such a way that they can avoid as much as possible those pitfalls. But when something new is thrown into a mix, a marriage, a child, the death of a parent, something major in terms of living, that can force a crumbling of that high functioning structure to some degree, and then the person is really in psychological trouble. But that's on the extreme end. And so in wounded development, you have somebody who is, to a greater or lesser degree, subject to the prodding of stimuli in life that can be very challenging for them. And they have to use a great deal of their psychological energy to manage those prompts. And it makes life hard work, really hard work. Our third element, which is internalizing, is very linked to implicit memory because we're internalizing our experience. And when we're dealing with wounded development, when there are gaps and failures, but they're not absolute, then you have a lot of introjects, and we talked about introjects in the other video on internalization. And an introject basically is whatever difficult or challenging caregiver there was on the outside continues to do their work on the inside. And those are all the negative tapes that we talk about that are running in our minds. But in traumatized development, there is an identification. And it can go in several directions, which we will get into, whether it's an identification with the aggressor and then the person acts that out in a sociopathic way, or whether they turn it against themselves and they become their own internal victim. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And then we have the realm of affects, which is just an enormous topic in wounded development and in traumatized development, because that is the vital field in which we live and have to run our lives on a daily basis. And then we have our attachments. And if there have been failures, we will not be securely attached. We will be insecurely attached. And depending upon the attachment system of our caregivers, we're going to develop something akin to that. And with the introduction of trauma, that is going to create very disorganized attachment. And we're going to be getting into all of the nuts and bolts of all of that. Very challenging topic. Failures and trauma affect our hemispheric development profoundly. We're going to be taking a look at that. And also it affects our voice and language, and how we are allowed or not allowed to speak, how we are allowed or not allowed to have our own thoughts. And all of this leads to the system of self, loops back to our system of self states, which with failures becomes somewhat fractured and can be dissociated. So you can have a number of dissociated states when you have wounded development. And in traumatized development, that wounding, those fractured states, enter what we call a very closed system, which consigns the person to living in a very limited landscape internally. So whether it's failures, gaps, mistakes that are repaired or recovered, and therefore the effects are somewhat mitigated, or you have serious, very serious trauma, acute or cumulative, it has an effect on every single one of these keystones of development to a greater or lesser degree, and to a more easily understood degree, or very, very complex. So I hope to help you understand all of this. It will certainly help you understand yourselves, and it will also help you understand the caregivers you had, the children that come after you, and your most precious relationships. And I want to remind you that whatever you have had to suffer, whatever you have had to manage, hope is right ahead. And I will see you very soon. Bye for now.